Our oral presentation this evening will focus on a number of topics. I will begin with some context setting with regards to safe schools in the Toronto District School Board. I will speak specifically to the current and historical context. Staff will then go through the highlights of past safety recommendations, share some relevant data about what is happening in our schools and circumstances faced by students. We will address current supports, describe what we are doing currently with regards to implementation of some of the various caring and safe schools strategies. We will provide an update with regards to our investments in mental health and how that connects to supporting students, and then outline our future work and priorities for the board. We would welcome any questions that you have at the conclusion of our presentation. I will share the presentation this evening with Executive Superintendents Dr. Uton Robinson and Mr. Jim Spiropoulos. Thank you, staff. Next slide, please. We're here tonight to address school safety in the Toronto District School Board. While this discussion follows the tragic and recent death of Jaheim Robinson at David and Mary Thompson CI, tonight's conversation is not about the tragic events of that day. This devastating tragedy, any tragedy, obligates us to reflect on the circumstances that may have prevented or helped us to intervene in such an incident, and what we can do moving forward to ensure that it does not happen again. The TDSB is committed to safe schools that are caring, welcoming, and respectful. All students have a right to feel safe at school, and all caring adults in our schools work to protect students, build positive relationships, create connections, solve problems, and promote respect. We have a strong foundation for school safety that we have progressively built on for years. We have among the most evidence-based and equity-informed policies and procedures to support student safety and well-being in the Toronto District School Board. We have made ongoing and significant investments to resources, staffing, and programs, including a recent investment of $5.9 million for 35 child and youth workers, 15 itinerant child and youth counselors, 16 social workers, and 40 additional school-based safety monitors. School success is an important preventative measure against disengagement, despair, and involvement in violence. Disparities in achievement are a risk for individual students and to school safety. Student achievement is something we have control over as educators and staff and must continue to address. At the TDSB, we have focused on equity of outcome and identified resources and supports to eliminate the disparities in academic achievement and opportunity by identity. We know that student well-being and connection has also been negatively impacted by the health pandemic. TDSB educators and staff regularly collaborate and partner with community organizations to offer additional activities outside of the school day that support youth employment, well-being, leadership, sports, and engagement. All of this is to ensure that young people have choices and access to opportunities that enable students to reach their full potential. The TDSB has and will continue to, hopefully, invest considerable resources in school safety, in addition to programs and opportunities that connect and engage students. It's important and critical to note, however, that in many ways, some of the services we provide are outside of our key mandate and what we are funded for as a district school board in Ontario. We, as an organization, continue to compensate for other gaps in services, and that's reflected in the bottom line of our budget. As staff and trustees, this work has been prioritized because we know the positive outcomes for students of these investments. However, this work of prevention, intervention, and responding to violence and youth disengagement is a shared responsibility for our society and other organizations and all levels of government. We cannot solve this problem alone. We are open and ready as staff to work with other stakeholders to create spaces that are nurturing, equitable, inclusive, and safe for our students and the citizens of Toronto. In closing, I need to say to those listening tonight that school safety is an urgent priority for our staff, students, families, and community members. We are committed to working together to ensure every student has what they need to be successful in school and to keep our schools safe. Thank you. As we begin the presentation this evening, I would ask, please advance the slide. I'd like to review our actions arising out of the tragedy at David and Mary Thompson. There is still an active police investigation underway, so it limits what we know and what we can say this evening. I would also ask everyone to join me in being respectful of Jaheem's family and the David and Mary Thompson community at large. Shortly after the tragedy, we committed to, I would say, 4 significant actions. The first is an extensive school safety audit conducted by a third party. Ms. Pon and I are engaged in interviewing firms to undertake this safety audit. Secondly, we committed to a full review of the incident following the conclusion of the police investigation to ensure we are aware of all the details, and again, to inform any strategies that we adopt not only at David and Mary Thompson, but across all of our schools in TDSB to make them safer. And then once these reviews are complete and the recommendations have been shared with us, that we will review our safety policies and procedures across the system with an eye to strengthening them. And we know that community perspective and community voice and experience will be key as we review those policies and procedures. Additionally, we also committed to ensuring that we engage educational partners in providing supports both with school staff and outside of regular school hours and days to engage young people and to address their needs. Thank you. I will now turn it over to Dr. Robinson.
Thank you very much, Director Colleen Russell-Rawlins. Through the chair, if we could advance to the next slide. The next slide speaks to current and the historical context, and some of us will recall that in May of 2007, there was another tragedy within our schools, and out of that particular tragedy, there was a comprehensive report, a report that contained over 126 recommendations. Even though all those recommendations didn't pertain specifically to the Toronto District School Board, about 81 of them did. And some of them specifically was in reference to, for example, responding to incidents of gender-based violence, wanting to ensure that we create a more positive bond between students and education workers, looking specifically at disciplinary measures in schools. We continue to do that work. After the report was brought forward, we then, as a team at that time in 2008, established what was referred to as the LAT, or more commonly known as the Leadership Action Team. And in the slide in front of you, you can see the 4 mandates that were outlined as a focus for that particular committee. Next slide, please. When we did look at the 81 recommendations that pertain specifically to the Toronto District School Board, there was an opportunity for us to look at various themes. And the themes, as you can see, are outlined as follows. What is important to know in that we, in the more than a decade since this particular report, have gotten better at moving forward in terms of our equity initiatives, where we are looking, as you know, at anti-oppression, looking at social justice. We have gone deeper. Similarly, in terms of issues around gender-based violence, we've ensured that our policies have been updated and revised accordingly. We have established a number of partnerships and integrated our services so that we collaborate more than we did at that point in time. And we continue to reach out to support our marginalized youth, or as we would say now, our underserved youth. And in terms of our silence, we certainly have changed that particular culture by bringing forward policies and procedures. Some of you are familiar with it in terms of the open communication policy that now has become the whistleblowers policy to ensure that there is transparency and an opportunity for everyone's voice to be heard. And sixth, as the director pointed out, continues to be our most urgent priority, and that is safety. And again, we've taken a number of steps, both in terms of resources as well as our physical schools, in order to ensure that they are safer places to learn. Next slide, please. These are some of the highlights of the actions that were taken out of that particular recommendation. Specifically, as mentioned before, a number of policies and procedures were reviewed. I would identify, for example, the expanded care and safe schools alternative programs, which we have within our system. At the time, there was a great need to ensure a student safety line. That has even morphed to a way by which we're looking at apps and ways that we communicate better with our students to ensure that they can reach out in ways that's going to keep them safer. Next slide, please. In addition to that, as I shared with you previously, reference to the open communication policy, but also the fact that we now have School Messenger, which again is a very important communication tool which we use extensively within our schools system in order to ensure safe and prompt communication. In addition to that, organizations such as the African Heritage Educators Network was reestablished at that point in time because, again, we wanted to ensure that voices from some of our more underserved, whether it be educators as well as communities, had a forum by which to express their needs and to be far more responsive to the various school communities at the time. We also looked at establishing leadership and mentoring programs for Indigenous and racialized teachers. Those mentoring programs and those professional learning opportunities continue to this day in more robust ways. Next slide, please. I will now yield to Executive Superintendent Jim Spiropoulos for this slide.
Okay, excellent. Thank you, Director Russell Rollins, for your leadership and for your trust related to this issue of critical importance in our board and beyond. And thank you, Dr. Robinson, for the excellent work you did, not just back in 2014 for a number of years as you were closely tied to it, but for your very thorough and concise update. Everyone, just in continuation, the School Safety and Engaged Communities team was created after an 18-year-old student, Hamid Aminzada, was killed inside North Albion Collegiate in 2014. And after extensive consultation, the review team made 41 recommendations, and the areas in which the recommendations were organized were crisis response, caring and safe environments, policies, procedures, and practices for school safety, and community engagement and support. Next slide, please, Tom. In terms of the high-level overview of the important actions that resulted from this tragic incident, Caring and Safe Schools Policy and Procedure, PO 51, was revised in ways that we hadn't experienced before. It was a far more specific policy than TDSB had seen, and in fact, any other school boards had seen. And we felt that there was a tremendous need to be more specific in this area in order to capture the nuances that were necessary for us to be as effective as possible. Many of you know an important document that's called Principles 911, which was completely revisioned and updated annually in the aftermath of this incident. We included additional information on the TDSB website, more specific to lockdowns, because we heard in the consultations that while this incident was unfolding, parents had no idea of what a lockdown actually meant, and they did not have access to translations in specific languages. Additionally, operational procedures were revised related to the promotion, transfer, and retention of students, and especially paying attention to Ministry of Education PPM 156, everyone, which talks about supporting transitions for students with special needs. Next slide, please. Some other major changes which came about as a result of this incident were changes to operational procedures dealing with facilities and access to schools. The next one is very critical, everyone. We were about to launch, for the first time ever, our positive school climate surveys. And those came back, and the survey was redone, and we adapted it to include specific questions regarding how students felt in terms of their safety in schools, in classrooms, and in their own communities. Additional professional support services were allocated to the school. That was important for us to note as precedent for how important it was to respond in a very intentional way to schools who had experienced tragic incidents. Some training, which was key, related to our communication staff. And I can say from personal experience, everyone, that this was key learning, because in the aftermath of these tragic incidents, the way that communication is handled, the vehicles that are used for communication, the preparedness of our system to communicate with those who are most impacted, including parents and family members who are standing outside of a school, as well as with the broader community, is of critical importance. And I think that this incident really helped us pave the way for the learning that we put into place, even as most recently as the incident that occurred at David and Mary Thompson. Additional supports for students who were forced to transfer schools, provided by child and youth counselors and caring and safe advisors, who were put in place in the aftermath of the C.W. Jeffries incident, as well as continuation and emphasis on the Priority Schools Initiative, which is of major importance to everyone, because we know that access to school space, especially during out-of-school times, is key, because many students and families who live in specific underserved communities do not have that level of access. And more on that in a sec. Next slide, please. You know, everyone, I would be remiss if I didn't mention before we got onto this slide that we've talked about an incident that occurred most recently on February 14th, 2022. And we talked about an incident that occurred on May 23rd, 2007. And we talked about an incident that occurred in 2014. But we have not talked about the fact that one of our students, a student at Victoria Park Secondary School, was very tragically killed outside of the school earlier this year. And I didn't want that to go unsaid. And I didn't also want to give a sense that that incident didn't also provide us, first of all, with the important task of supporting the individuals at the school, but also taking the time to support the specific family, to ensure that the students and staff who had to return to Victoria Park Secondary School were prepared to do so. And in fact, that we rallied around this entire incident to, in spite of the tragic circumstances, take up as much learning as we could to make sure that incidents like this do not ever happen in our schools. So I thought it was important to mention that. I want to dig into the data for just a couple of minutes here, everyone, and I want to tell you very specifically why these 4 years and the time periods that are on this chart have been selected. And it was very important for us in terms of accuracy. And you can see in the footnotes that's at the bottom of the slide, For consistency and accuracy of trend analysis, the date ranges that were selected in 2018 and 2019 were consistent with the time period between September 1st, 2019 and March 22nd of 2020. I wanted you to have the latest information, but if you remember, the world changed on or around March 20th of 2020. And to go beyond that in terms of comparisons wouldn't provide an accurate comparison because students were engaged in in-person learning almost for the rest of that school year with brief time periods. 2020, 2021, everyone, is also not a good year for comparison because if you remember, we started the school year without in-person learning. In-person learning was on a pause. So we thought the best years to be able to draw comparisons for would have been 18-19, 19-20, and 21-22. And I want to draw your attention, first of all, to the total number of suspensions. And I want to thank everyone who is part of the amazing group we have at TDSB, who have worked in different ways related to student discipline to dramatically reduce the total number of suspensions. I want you also to notice the number of one-day suspensions and the dramatic reduction there, and the sense of building a culture where a one-day suspension isn't really a part of what we do. And we look for every single alternative before a student is suspended as we continue to work towards a culture where attendance in school is a human right for all students. And I want to take you down to the two lines at the bottom of each section of the grid, which talk about 20-day suspensions. And I think those numbers are self-explanatory, everyone. I want to say this, there aren't many suspensions every year which are 20 days because we typically, through the good work that happens through different types of restorative practices and restorative justice, through the good work that happens in the trustee appeal hearings, and through negotiation with parents and schools to mitigate those back. There's a lot of mitigating to be done this year. 46 thus far. Those are the most egregious types of incidents that we experience in terms of student discipline, everyone. And I don't think I have to be any more descriptive than that. Thank you, Tyler. Next slide, please. You know, before I get to that, I should say, many of you know, and you've heard us say this before, that schools are really a microcosm of society. And we know from data that exists within the city of Toronto that violent crime incidents are also on the rise within our city, especially with respect to gun violence and especially with respect to the ages of some of the individuals who are involved in gun violence. And one of the things that we have to be extra cautious of is making sure that we provide opportunities for students to be engaged. You know, as we were heading into the March break, I got a call from Director Russell Rollins, as I typically do, and the conversation quickly turned to what concerns might be in the days and weeks ahead, because Colleen has been following this with me on a daily basis. And I said, you know, it would be great to be able to have access to programs, because what we keep hearing on the ground is that students don't have anything to do. Children will not have anything to do next week, and that will impact. And I'm so grateful to her because in very short order, she said, yeah, let's do what we need to do. And we were able to put some programming in place, which is in response to a slide like this, everyone. And this was a very recent study done by a group called KEDS Consulting, which is a wonderful group which does research from an anti-racist, anti-oppression perspective. And look at these numbers, where it says that 2.8% of kids with a household income of less than $39,000, $40,000 participate in organized sports, whereas 71% of kids with a household income greater than $100,000 participate in organized sports. And I think what this screams to us is that providing opportunities for students, especially those that don't have access, is very, very, very important. The problem and the challenge we face is that we're not funded to run programs such as these. Focus on Youth is a wonderful program, and so many of us have been involved in it at different levels, and it's only for part of the year, and there have been some attempts to expand it to different parts of the year. But in terms of other times, this statistic is deeply troubling about who has access and who doesn't, and what responsibility we have to work outside of our core business to be able to provide these types of opportunities. And you also know how the pandemic has differentiated in terms of impact and socioeconomic status. And community organizations that typically offer programming for students and children and families in underserved communities have not been operational. So this stings even more at this point in time. Next slide, please, Tyler. Everyone, our interventions in TDSB fall into a number, or can be categorized into a number of different headings: prevention, intervention, response, and shared responsibility. Director Russell Rollins already spoke about the first very important motion. I'm very proud of our staff because we've almost hired that entire complement. And I want to tell you about some of the challenges that we are facing in our system, most specifically, for example, for school-based safety monitors. When we hired our first 26 SBSMs, everyone, to be a part of the additional, they got absorbed into our system literally in short order, in days, and just over a week, because that was the type of need that existed. And we've gotten back to hiring, and we feel as though we've hired almost the entire complement, which you as trustees allocated for this important purpose. I want to thank the folks who, again, in 48 hours, set up 4 different locations for March break programming, and approximately 500 students walked through those programs. And it makes us think of, as we were watching the videos over March break, and I know some people had the opportunity to attend, I wonder what those 500 or so students and children would have been doing had it not been for the commitment we made. More than ever before, everyone, we're initiating and engaging in cross-sectoral partnerships through programs like SafeTO, and we have a lot more to contribute to SafeTO instead of just space for organizations, as well as an organization called the Ripple Effect, which is led by many of you who know Donna Harrow, who is one of the co-founders of our Afrocentric school, is leading this initiative of community leaders across sectors, and good work has already started to happen there. We're preparing to invest in updated school camera infrastructure, as well as additional infrastructure in schools. And very, very importantly, we are creating an audit process to ensure that school-based sites are caring, safe, accepting, and include elements of environmental design. Next slide, please, Tyler. Everyone, you've seen a lot of what comes next because it's a part of the larger, more systemic commitments that we've made as a system to ensure that, because we've identified student discipline as a form of streaming, that it must be tackled with the intensity that's connected to all of our commitments related to anti-racism and anti-oppression. And I won't go through and read all of these specific recommendations, but I will say that in combination with removing suspensions, discretionary suspensions for kids in kindergarten to grade 3, continuing to take identity into account, working closely with the Center of Excellence for Black Student Achievement, as well as the UIEC, we are seeing wonderful progress, although lots more still to be done. Additionally, taking the data and continuing to work with the data in ways that are consistent, making sure that we address issues of bias, power, and privilege, especially as they relate to those individuals who conduct discipline proceedings, and supporting administrators to the greatest extent possible through our centrally assigned principal cohort. Next slide, please, Tyler. This is a continuation, everyone, and I think there is a small addition that I would like to make, and I know that I made it in a slide that's following, but many of you have seen that there has been a surge in the use of restorative practices within our system, and we have borrowed tremendously from the expertise of Indigenous communities related to RP, as well as support from Tanya Senk and the staff at the UIEC. And we are continuing to work not just with restorative practices, but also in ways that emphasize restorative justice. And for those of you who may not know sort of the nuances and the difference between the two, Restorative justice is more of a process where a person who perhaps has caused harm meets and connects with those who have been impacted or harmed. And there are conversations and processes in place of how to repair the specific harm between the parties who have been involved. Restorative practices are more combined to a discipline through which individuals and groups, through participatory learning, often in circles with more individuals than those who have been directly impacted, achieve progress in a participatory and collaborative way. So those are the nuanced differences, and we know that we are continuing our work in both of those, and supporting our staff to learn more and to work more in those ways. Some important highlights, everyone. Next slide, please, Tyler. Since September of 2021, there's been more staffing. We've extended our programming. We continue along the path of systemic change in caring and safe schools. We've developed and enhanced cross-sectoral partnerships. We're investing in capital infrastructure. We've worked through principles of restorative practice and restorative justice to support more successful outcomes. And we're preparing for the rollout of a new student reporting application. Everyone, I wanted to prepare a little bit for what's ahead and what you might be seeing, because we feel as though we're going to need more individuals to work in the area of caring and safe schools, especially individuals who have deep community contacts. There's been a motion which has been discussed amongst our Board of Trustees around school-based safety monitors and enhancing that group. Security and infrastructure modernization. Here's what's included in that, everyone. We're talking about swipe cards, access to schools, a camera system which is in need of updating, and which we have begun the process to update. And finally, we need to do more related to youth engagement, and we have to build on successful programs like Focus on Youth. We have to partner with community grassroots organizations and provide space and build on the beautiful work that happened over the course of the March break to make sure that we wrap our students around in as many supports as possible. These cost money. I know what people are thinking through the chair whenever we mention this, that where is it being referred? Where is it going? I think in the days ahead, and because this work is moving so rapidly, you can expect an update through FBEC or at your pleasure and through whatever group you feel is most appropriate of a costing out, more specific costing out of these items, so that we can bring them to fruition and continue the good work that's happening. So I'm not sure, Dr. Robinson or Director Russell Rollins, if you have anything more to add, but that's it for my comments, and we wrapped it up in good time. So thank you all.
Thank you very much, Executive Superintendent Spiropoulos, not only for your presentation this evening, but for the work you did in pulling this together and your day-to-day leadership along with the senior team and the executive superintendents for learning centers in supporting school safety. The data that we saw in the fall, the data that you brought forward this evening suggests that there is more work to do, and certainly as a team, we are very committed to working with community partners and to fully educating every student that walks through our doors so that disengagement is less likely to happen, and where there are additional supports that we are using our resources effectively to support every student and every family. So thank you very much to the team that contributed to the presentation this evening, and in particular to Jim and to you, Tom.